Well, I want to start off with a topic that has quite a bit of complexity and nuance, and that's the issue of charity. Usually when you hear of people getting involved in philanthropic work, you think, well, this is great. You know, there are people that actually genuinely want to help people with issues with poverty, those who are dealing with cancer. But the reality is that a lot of charities are not as cut and dry. There are serious issues that could actually harm communities more than help them. In fact, let's take a look at the next video and we'll discuss more.
John was a friend in Rwanda, and he told me the story that after the Rwandan genocide that he had a church from Atlanta that started sending over eggs and ended up just distributing eggs in his small community outside of Kigali. And this seems like a great thing to do, right? The church wanted to help after the genocide. But Jono, a few years before, had started a small egg business himself. He put this investment in all the materials that he needed to start this egg business. His business was starting to grow, it was starting to take off, and then all of a sudden, in one summer, there became this surplus of eggs that were flooding the market in his area. And so this desire that the church had to really take care of a need, it did take care of a need, but the problem is that it put Jono out of business. He ended up selling his hens, and then the next year the church decided to focus its attention to somewhere else in the world. Jono was out of business. No one else was there providing eggs, and so they had to bring the eggs in from another community. So this desire to help in that community, according to Jono, actually had a long-term negative impact on that community.
So that's an example of a charity or a person trying to do good, and unfortunately it goes wrong. Another example that I found really interesting involved second-hand goods that are being sent to Kenya. Now, people will have clothing that they no longer want from the United States or other parts of the West. They'll send their clothing to Kenya, and as a result, people will stop farming for cotton and they'll stop producing their own clothing. So it's actually putting people out of business in Kenya. And again, it all started off with good intentions, but the end result isn't necessarily a good result. So Bob, I want to bring you in on this because you've done a considerable amount of work and research when it comes to charities and donations. And you know, what is really at play here? How do you determine whether or not what you are doing to help a community is causing more harm than good?
It's a difficult question. It's kind of a case-by-case thing. It depends on which charity you're looking at and what their goal is and how they do it. You have to actually look at the individual charity. So I can't give a blanket answer. And I want to defer in a second to Shane and Sonali as well, because they have experience running charities, and I've just hung around them a lot. So I don't want to pretend too much expertise here. I think the biggest issues are that people get confused on. One was touched on in the video. We tend to confuse intent with effect. You know, it's this, good intentions thing, and so people feel like if they put their money in, well, they've done their job. And if you do it without the research, that's the thing. The burden's on us as donors, as givers. And I mean, the history is rife with examples of, Live Aid, this wonderful global thing, which did do a lot of good. It did feed people and also wound up helping to support the dictatorship in Ethiopia. And, we have to look at these things. Pat Robertson's charities, left, right, doesn't matter. You can look at it. But the other thing I'd want to mention too in terms of like misconceptions is that talking about charities with a critical eye, trying to maximize what effect we have. As soon as we begin having this conversation, it's very easy for somebody in the audience to mistake the fact that we're talking about how to do this most effectively for a broad criticism of the notion of charity at all. And the charitable impulse is fragile and important enough that I think it's really important to frame this conversation with the basic idea that charity's good, charity works, charity's a really cool thing. We're just trying to get into how and why and best and how to do it right. So please don't anybody mistake this let's get it right with it's wrong. So with that, I'd actually want to defer.
This is a very, very important issue. When I helped found the Afghan Women's Mission in 2000, so 14 years ago, one of the very important things to us, almost intuitively, because my work is rooted in activist work, is to understand that when we want to, for example, help Afghan women in the case of Afghan Women's Mission, we don't just go in like the church in your example and say we have a surplus of stuff here, let's dump it on them, which is essentially dumping. In the case of used clothes, for example, after the Philippines hurricane, that's what happened. What we said was, what do people want? Let's work with people who are on the ground, who know better than anybody else what they need, who are leading the efforts, who are setting the agenda, and they will tell us how much money they need and what they need it for. And that's what our model has been based on right from the start, and not all charities do that. And I really think it's important for donors to understand that when charities work in partnership, not as a master and subordinate relationship, but in partnership, in fact, elevating the recipient to the level of master, that those charities are successful. Those charities are really getting the money. And the other issue is, you know, as you were saying, Bob, on the issue of giving and people's desire to give. I think Americans are extremely generous. However, we shouldn't conflate giving with cleaning out our closets. It makes me just annoyed when I get emails from people who say, can I send a box of old clothes and shoes to you because my kids can't use them anymore? I said, you know, honestly, Afghans can do better than your old clothes. Why don't you send money so that they can make their own clothes? You should give your clothes either to Goodwill or somebody you know, get your tax write-off, etc. But if you really want to help, give money. And then they usually don't respond.
So let me jump in with the idea of giving money and giving hand-me-downs. I get the sense that even though the majority of people do want to contribute to charity in some ways, a lot of times they want to do so in a very simplistic way. And it's not necessarily because they're bad people. Please do not misinterpret what I'm trying to say, but because we are already bogged down by a terrible economy here. We're bogged down by, you know, being forced to work more than 40 hours per week. We're trying to make ends meet. So as a result, when we do want to practice a good deed, we want to do so in the simple way and see if that has any type of impact whatsoever. Now, you talk about going into a country and kind of changing the system or doing something to reform a system as opposed to using a simplistic approach of donating money or clothing. Shane, is that something that you feel that people in the Western world or in more I would say well-off countries are prepared to do? Is that asking too much of them?
Well, the motto where I work at the Liberty Hill Foundation is change, not charity. And that's exactly what it's about. You know, my golden rule is never do for others what they can do for themselves. And that starts with making decisions for people, deciding what they need and what the solutions are to their problems. And as soon as you start doing that, you take their power away, and that makes the situation worse. And really, I mean, I do think, you know, most money goes to charity, it goes to schools and churches, and I think we're all actually smarter than that. And we know that that's actually not going to solve a problem. Those are symptoms, those are Band-Aids. You know, why ladle soup when you can end hunger?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I do want to give you guys some statistics when it comes to charitable giving here in the United States. Actually, the number of people giving to charities has increased significantly. Total giving to charitable organizations in the United States was up by billions of dollars. In fact, a total of $316.23 billion was given in 2012. That was about 2% of the GDP, and that was an increase of 3.5% in 2011. And as in previous years, the majority of that giving came from individuals, not corporations. But unfortunately, and I find this unfortunate, the majority of this charitable giving is from people who want to give money to their own churches. So we all know that a lot of times that money is spent on improving the appearance of a church as opposed to helping the poor. I don't want to make a blanket statement. A lot of churches do some work to help those in poverty. But, you know, I think that there is a lot of pressure from people to reinvest in their faith when we have other countries that are dealing with severe hunger and they're dealing with significant disease as a result of lack of resources. Sonali, I want to go back to you. I kind of want you to elaborate a little more on what you guys are doing in Afghanistan, because I find it really interesting.
Well, when I traveled there some years ago, the group that I work with, RAWA, Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, they wanted to build a, actually before I'd gone to that trip, on that trip, they had wanted to build an irrigation canal in a very remote part of Afghanistan called Farah province, shares a border with Iran. And it's so remote, there's no electricity, there's a number of villages, it's dry, it looks biblical. I mean, there's literally just mud huts, you feel like you're in another era. And they wanted to build this irrigation canal because they realized that these 3 villages that were fighting over water resources could equitably get water if they had a particular canal done in a particular way. US forces had come in and just built wells all over the place, and in a few years those wells had gone dry. So we said, well, you guys know what you're doing. Tell us how much money you need. We sent them the money, they built it, and I went and I saw that canal, and it was incredible. I met with the elders from the villages, these elderly men who were just so grateful that they were able to have access to water, precious water resources that at that point was irrigating farms that were feeding pretty much all the people in the village there. And that was because that project was led by the women who live there. You know, they got the funding from abroad. They needed our financial solidarity, but they didn't need our brain power, because really we just did more harm than good, and we as foreigners.
So you don't think that it's more effective for the United States to just kind of invade the country and fight for their democracy? Because that's been a really successful thing that we've done, right? That was sarcasm in case you guys missed it. But Bob, go ahead.
You wouldn't look at Kickstarter or Indiegogo and say, you know what, they should do this completely differently. Let me rearrange everything. People know what they need on the ground, and Sonali, you hit on it a couple of times here, and Shane, I know, I'm pretty certain you agree with this, that you know, it's all about, people already, the mistake we make is thinking, I'm going to fix things. Right. No, people are already fixing things. Right. And we just have to listen to them. They know what they need. There's a condescension almost in our view toward people who just didn't win the birth lottery. And they're as smart and as resourceful as we are. We just have to sort of get out of our egos and just ask them, what do you need? That's one of the reasons I like Kiva. That's one of the reasons that worked there. Otherwise, we wind up repeating, it's just colonialism in a different form, saying we have the answers, we have the solutions, and we'll bring them in. And it's about as effective as colonialism.
I mean, that's why we fund community organizing, because it's exactly about the people who are affected by the problems leading the charge to solve those problems. And you know, when the problem is that people are getting screwed because they don't have the power to demand justice, then the only solution is community organizing. And that's with the people, you know, leading that charge, and investing in leadership is what's going to last over the long haul. You know, eggs and bread and soup is not going to solve, no major problem, you know, in the US, certainly anywhere else, has been solved with those solutions, although those are critically important interventions. I mean, gay marriage, civil rights, a 5-day work week, that's community organizing.
Yeah, and I think it is incumbent on donors to do their research. For example, there had been a network of young students of Indian origin in the United States that had been raising money for Hindu charities, and it turned out that some of that money was being funneled to the fundamentalist Hindutva movement in India. RAWA is a group in Afghanistan whose values, myself and the other supporters of RAWA who run Afghan Women's Mission, really felt like we connected with them. Their values of democracy, women's rights, human rights, universal values of human rights, being anti-imperialist, being anti-fundamentalist as much as they were anti-imperialist. When we felt that their values were consistent with us, their expertise on how to fix things on the ground we trusted, but we needed to be in line with their values. And you know, certainly there might be people who feel that they should support the Hindu fundamentalist movement in India and that their values are consistent, but they shouldn't in any way be fooled into thinking that they're supporting, you know, something else. So know what you're giving to, understand the values of the group that you're giving to. It's a bit easier when you're working with groups in the US because you might be able to visit them right there, but if they're all the way at the other side of the world, do your research.
Right. Absolutely. I think research is important, and there are a number of resources online where you can do your own investigation prior to getting involved with any type of cause. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about microloans, because microloans have an interesting element of allowing people to become self-sufficient. And I think that that's something that we all inherently want. We want to be independent. We want to be able to rely on our own abilities and our own skills. So can you elaborate on that a little bit, Bob? Because giving a loan is very different from just dumping money or dumping goods into a country.
Generally, yeah. Microlending is part of microfinance, this whole thing where you're just bringing the ordinary tools of finance that we take for granted, savings and credit, and bringing them to the working poor all over the world. Now, you know, there are a lot of generalizations made about it, and one thing that I learned while I was writing my book, The International Bank of Bob, now available in bookstores. But I traveled all over the world, and I visited people in Lebanon and Kenya and Cambodia, and you read it in the book, it's a bunch of places, to actually see how it was working on the ground. And there's not one answer. And it's as local as all of these different places. And, but what it all has in common, again, is listening to the local individuals and saying, now what do you need? In a lot of cases, what they're doing is they're building or sustaining a business. In some cases, they're actually just looking for capital in order to make, to put tin on the roof of their house so they have a more secure home. There's all sorts of different things. There's education loans. It's not one definite kind of project where you're just saying it's one specific thing. And the studies on it wind up being kind of mixed, largely because of the limitations of Western academic studies. I have to publish in 18 months. You can't really measure the long-term, the 30-year effects of making financing available in an 18-month paper being published. But we do see increases in purchases of durable goods. We see, a longer-term thinking in the time horizon of the recipients. And when I was on the ground, and it's anecdotal, but I met people all over the world who were really so grateful for the opportunity to be able to control their finances as they saw fit, with greater flexibility. So I have become sort of a convert who bangs the drum.
That's really fascinating. And talk a little bit about the number of people that are likely to repay these microloans. And by the way, the amount of money that people give in these microloans, because they are micro, it's not hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it varies again from country to country, but in a country like Rwanda or in Nepal, you'll often find somebody's loan is a couple $100, maybe even less. I met one woman in Rwanda who had 18 months before I met her, she was living in an unpowered, leaking shack. She's got 3 kids. She's a single mom in a country recovering from genocide. I can no longer complain about my life ever. And 18 months later, she has been able to build to acquire a small little 2-room but secure, clean, safe home. Back room that she raises the kids. Front room is a little convenience store sort of a thing. And those kids now were going to have a completely different life. And her loan was $150.
That's amazing.
Roughly,
it's amazing.
When you convert it. So, and in order to finance that, as somebody who goes to the website, kiva.org, my $150, a year later I get it back, I'm probably going to have maybe $148.50 of it. So for $150, being able to help that's pretty powerful bang for the buck. So it's part of what I dig about it. But again, it's not a perfect system, and I don't mean to sit here and say that there haven't been mistakes made and a million other things. Kiva, the platform that does this, has to do as much due diligence with the partners that they have in the developing world more as we do as people coming to it, needing to investigate what charity we're getting invested in.
Now, this is a topic that I feel like we can do the entire show on. Unfortunately, the segment isn't long enough to cover all bases, but Shane, I want to give you an opportunity to have the last word. What is your final piece of advice to anyone who does want to donate to charity?
I think there's 2 kinds of power: organized people and organized money. And if you've got organized money, find the organized people. They know the best solutions for their challenges. They will know what to do with it. Marry organized money and organized power, and you can see real change. And otherwise, you have to consider that in every interaction there's an exchange of power. And so how are you interacting with people to make sure that they have the power to change their conditions? And if the way that you're interacting with them, by giving them soup or eggs or whatever, is disempowering them, then that's perpetuating the much bigger problem, which is the lack of power